former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, Divine Economy Model, with Bruce Koerber.
Hi, everyone. It's Wade Franson here, Created in the Image of God. Tonight, it is episode 110. Imagine that. We've been doing this now for going on about 2 years or longer. And it's taken that long, really, to get to the point where we can dive deep into a topic that has interested and fascinated me my entire life. Going way back to when I was a young person, and my father was an immigrant. Still is, by the way, an immigrant. But he was learning a trade as a welder and learning about investing and buying real estate and trying to provide for his family. And for me, the yin yang between a spiritual path and materialism was always a challenging one. There was a time when I walked away from all things material, decried any kind of material success. And when I graduated from my undergrad degree with a degree in theology and went off to save the world, I did so with a one-way ticket and a suitcase. And I went to Europe. And many years later, I ended up resigning from the ministry to separate my faith from my paycheck because I didn't want to be in a situation where I had to teach something that I no longer believed or didn't believe, or things that were changing that were different from what I did believe. And then I had to reinvent myself as a businessman, went and got an MBA, Master's in Business Administration, and did, fairly well in the technology field. Ended up working for a global consulting firm with some of the top companies in the nation. Ended up doing strategic planning for a company called Countrywide, which was at the heart of the economic bubble of a decade and a half ago now. Went up and down in the elevator with Angela Mazzillo at Countrywide, doing strategic planning for that organization. And he was later featured on the cover of Time magazine in January 2009 as the #1 cause of the economic meltdown. And I wrote a paper for my MBA class comparing Countrywide culture to the mafia. So these inputs have always been at the heart and core of my quest, my search. And as I've said elsewhere, it goes way back to the fact that I was born in Canada, but grew up in America until such time as I ended up in 4th grade in Sweden, a socialist country. And again, this yin yang between economic models has captivated me my entire life. What's my point here? My point is we now have a gentleman who's about to join us here live in the studio, who has made it his life's mission to study into something that he calls the divine economy model. Without any further ado, let us introduce Bruce Koerber to the show, and to you, my dear guests, my dear viewers. Welcome, Bruce. How are you this evening?
I'm doing good, Wade. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
So, as we always do in the show, we're going to start by going into your background, your origin story. The show is Created in the Image of God. We want to understand a little bit about what shaped Bruce Koerber before Bruce Koerber took conscious thought to shape his own destiny. So what is your origin story? Your parents, where did you come from? Into what world were you born, both at the macro level and at the micro level in space and time?
Well, my origin story is a story of a series of epiphanies and a series of the providential grace of God. So I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My parents were from Pittsburgh. That was at that time was a very had strong ethnic communities. My father was from a Protestant family. My mother was from a Catholic family. There was a taboo for intermarriage. When they got married, they felt firsthand about the religious hypocrisy, and they decided that they would not belong to a church. So I grew up not having a church that our family went to. I wasn't taught atheism. I was allowed to go to church with friends or family, but we just didn't do it as a family. And so I think as a result of that, I was not indoctrinated, which allowed me to be an independent thinker. So I grew up in a small suburb. The school district that I was in was small. So after elementary school, I actually went to what was called a junior senior high. And at that point, right between those schools periods, I went to a basketball program for 2 weeks. It was hosted at the high school, but all the elementary schools from the area would bled into that. And that's where I first encountered some black students. I had never met any black individuals before. And I became friends. It felt really natural. That was an epiphany for me. It was an understanding of the oneness of mankind. And so, in addition to that, I never learned prejudice in my home. In fact, some of my heroes were the great black athletes, Roberto Clemente, Mean Joe Green, Franco Harris. So I really had no problem with any of that. And at the same time as this period in my life, my grandmother, who was a Catholic grandmother, she converted to Unity, which was a non-denominational church, Christian church, and she loved talking about her spiritual journey. So I would listen to her conversation. She talked about the oneness of religion. She talked about universal mind, and it kind of began giving me a spiritual perception. And at that same, so then a little bit later, I started enjoying the music of the era with a lot of rock and roll going on, big name artists and bands that were really very prominent and successful. Pittsburgh was an interesting place because it had three major venues. And so these bands and artists, when they were traveling on tour, they would come through Pittsburgh. And so I started going to concerts. I was going like 2 or 3 a month, And here's how it worked. My father, he would take me to my grandparents' house because they lived right across the street from a streetcar stop. I would get on the streetcar, take that downtown, and then go to the concert, get back on the streetcar, go back to my grandparents, spend the night, and my dad would pick me up the next day. So that's how that kind of worked. When I graduated from high school, I went to live with my older brother, and he had a really large collection of albums, and I would listen to those albums. The thing that was interesting about albums back then, they were like photo albums. You open it up and the lyrics would be written on it. You'd have pictures of the groups and the artists and stuff. And so one of the my brother had a couple albums of Seals and Crofts, and I really liked their music. And one of their albums was called Diamond Girl. And when I opened it up, it had a picture of Dash Crofts and his wife Billie Lee, and Jimmy Seals and his wife Ruby Jean. And that was an interracial marriage, and that was another epiphany for me. It felt just like this is the right way of solving some problems. So when I found out that Seals and Crofts were coming to town, I made sure I went to the concert. I went to my grandparents' house. I got on the streetcar, went downtown, went to the concert. It was a fantastic concert. They invited anybody who was there to stay afterwards, and they talk, have a conversation. We'll get to know them. So I went to that, and when anybody who was there, they gave everybody there a rose, and then they talked about the oneness of mankind. They talked about the oneness of religion, and I remember then when I went back, I went back to my grandparents. I woke up, the next morning, and my grandmother loved to have those kind of conversations. So we spoke about the message that they were sharing, and everything was really interesting and I think this is a time when I was starting to mature. So I was going to a junior college. I had some really good instructors. I enjoyed that. I was good in math. I was good in science. I decided to stop smoking marijuana, to stop drinking, and just focus on my academics. And so I also identified at that point my career interest, which was to be a forester. So I applied to Penn State to the forestry program, and they accepted me. I remember the last class that I took at junior college was an economics class, and I enjoyed it. You know, that was my first introduction to that. So what happened then? My dad got transferred. He got transferred to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So that next summer, before I went to Penn State, I went to Cedar Rapids with my parents, and during that summer, I just kind of read as much as I could about forestry. Then I went back to Pennsylvania to go to Penn State. Well, this was a providential grace of God, because when I got there, I went there a week early because it was orientation week, and one of the features of that was that they'd have all the student organizations would put up their information tables, so you could go and see what was going on. And I was walking along, and I get to this one table. They had a placard there and said, "One God, oneness of religion, oneness of mankind, equality of men and women, essential harmony of science and religion, elimination of prejudice of all kinds." It was like a checklist for what I believed. And so there was a guy named Ira Grafman who was sitting at the table. And for some reason, out of the depths of my back in my mind came out this question: is this what seals and crofts are? And he said, yes. So I was like, oh, that just was accelerated my interest. So I just gobbled up all the literature that I could get. And he noticed how sincere and excited I was. So he made sure he gave me his phone number. So still, there was a couple of days before classes started. So I just start reading all these pamphlets, learned about Baha'u'llah, never heard of him before. So I called Ira, and I went to his house, met his wife. He answered my questions. And then he gave me an introductory book called Baha'u'llah in a New Era, and a prayer book. And so that was another epiphany for me, because even though I never prayed, in my life, I had never prayed before. But in addition to that, I had never read the Word of God in the pure form. So when I read the prayers revealed by Baha'u'llah, I recognized instantly the power and the beauty and the might of the creative Word of God. So I shortly after that, December 10th, 1977, I became a Baha'i in State College, Pennsylvania. And there were 10 Baha'is there. Half of them were international students. So then that year ended, academic year, and I was finished with my junior year. I went back to Cedar Rapids for the summer, and I thought, well, I'll see if there's any Baha'is here. There was a gigantic, dynamic Baha'i community there of over 40 Baha'is of all ages. They had all kinds of activities and firesides, deepenings, and picnics. And a lot of people my age. Was really amazing. Well, then the next providential grace of God came, because that summer I went to a 1 week long Baha'i school at a permanent Baha'i school called Lou Helen, and it was in Michigan. And that whole week I was there, and the hand of the cause of God, Mr. Kadem, was there, and his wife, the auxiliary board member, Mrs. Kadem, were there. So I was immersed in that beauty and knowledge that they shared. So I went back to Penn State, worked on my bachelor's degree in forestry. And I remember one of the ways I would teach the faith there, I would make Baha'i flyers, and I'd put them up on bulletin boards. And I remember that it's related to what we're talking about tonight. I remember I made a flyer called Baha'i Economics. And if you're familiar with economics, there's the supply and the demand curve, and they intersect, okay? So my Baha'i Economics flyer was justice and unity instead of supply and demand. So that was a kind of an interesting thing. So I finished school, and I was wanting to go pioneering, international pioneering. So I debated going into the Peace Corps. But what I ended up deciding was I needed to get a job and make money, and that. So I did some research, found out that Mississippi had the largest number of forested acres east of the Mississippi, and I thought, well, that's a great place to teach the oneness of mankind. So I went home front pioneering. I contacted the local spiritual assembly in Jackson, Mississippi. They said, come on down. So I went to Mississippi. I found a job in Taylorsville, Mississippi, working for Georgia Pacific. I was a forester for 4 years. And then towards the end of that period, my grandfather died and he left me some money. And I was interested, I had been studying about international forestry and learning, it's completely different. The trees are used for firewood and for food and for fodder. So I applied to Auburn University to study fruit and nut tree production. And another reason I wanted to go there is because my Baha'i girlfriend at that time was going to Tuskegee Institute, which is not far from Auburn. So anyways, I got accepted to the program, went there. I got a horticulture degree in fruit and nut tree production. While I was there, the Auburn Baha'i group, we sponsored a luncheon. And we invited prominent individuals to that luncheon to help them become aware of the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran. And at the luncheon, I sat next to this professor named Dr. James Stallings, who was in agriculture and economics. And he had worked internationally quite a bit, and mostly in Tanzania. So when we were discussing, and I was telling him I was interested in international work, and I was finishing up my degree in horticulture, he invited me to be his graduate student in agriculture economics. So when I started into that program, I needed to get some classes in economics. So I took a macroeconomics class in the economics department. That was in 1985. Here's the thing about that. 1982, Auburn was selected as the home of the Ludwig von Mises Institute, which made it the world center for Austrian economics. So the economics department at Auburn had quite a few Austrian economists in it. So when I took this class, my first class was, and this was another providential grace of God, my first class was with Dr. Roger Garrison, who was an Austrian economist. He taught me about Austrian economics, and I fell in love with it. And he became my mentor. He was on my committee, and everything I did, I bounced off of him. And anyways, because I was at the beginning, I was there at the very beginning of the Mises Institute. I'm actually a charter member of the Ludwig von Mises Institute. So anyways, I got a master's degree in economics. I was still interested in international work, so I decided to go look for apply for a PhD at the University of Arizona in dryland forestry. I got accepted. I went there for one semester, and then there was a month off. My parents said, well, come to Iowa, paint our house, we'll pay you. So I went there for a month. And while I was there, I got there one day. The next day was feast day. I called the Baha'is. They found out where the feast was. I got there a few minutes late. This house that it was in kind of had an L-shaped room, and I was sitting in it, and one of the individuals, a young woman, recited a prayer. And when she did, this feeling in my mind and thoughts were, well, that's a devotion and steadfastness like Juliet Thompson, a famous early Baha'i. That was what came to my heart when I was hearing that. And then so after feast, there's a social, and I got to reacquainted with all these Baha'is. In fact, there was a Baha'i who I knew from Georgia who is now living in Cedar Rapids. It was a really fun thing. Anyway, so I eventually got to talk to the woman who read the prayer, and her name was Jeannie Smith. And I remembered her. We had known each other from before. But one of the things she said was amazing. She said, it had been 8 years since I'd been in Cedar Rapids. I was just there for a summer. And she said, it's really strange. She said, last night I had a dream and you were in my dream. So my feeling about her steadfastness and devotion, and her feeling, that there was definitely some divine mystical things going on. So we wanted to be with each other as much as we could, because I was only going to be there for a short time. And 1 week of that 1 month, I was going to Pittsburgh to visit my grandmother. So it was a very short time, but we did as much as we could together, and we decided we were going to get married. So my next break was Thanksgiving. So I came back at Thanksgiving time. We got married, moved back down to Tucson. By January, she found out she was pregnant. And then in February, she found out she was pregnant with twins. So
Wow. So let me jump in real quick. What year are we talking about right now?
1986.
So we're in 1986, and had you already completed your degree in economics at this point, or in
Yeah,
forestry rather?
I had a bachelor's degree in forestry in 1979. Worked for 4 years. Then I had a master's degree in horticulture in 83, and a master's degree in economics in 85.
So I'm reminded of the scripture in Proverbs about make it fit for yourself in the fields and then build your house. So we're now at the point where you are settling down with twins on the way. But before we go there, and we're going to have to go to our first commercial break here in a
Okay.
second,
Okay.
I want to ask you to explain as succinctly as you can for the audience what Austrian economics is.
Well, it's a branch. It comes from classical liberalism. Basically, what it does, it recognizes that the correct scientific methodology for economics is subjectivism, because humans are subjective. That's different from the other branches of economics.
And I'm looking it up here. There's a nice quote here that economic theory should be exclusively derived from basic principles of human action.
Right. That's true.
So I think that's going to be a good segue when we get back into the next section and start talking about your divine economy model.
Okay.
But in order to give everyone an additional quick insight into that, you've written a number of books, and we have a book trailer here for one of those. Tell us very briefly, and just again, soundbite, the sequence of books that you've written.
I wrote one on macroeconomics, microeconomics, ethical economics, economic justice. Then I have a couple book sets that are combines of those. And then this book, which we're about to talk about, is the one that kind of is like a gateway into those others.
All right. Well, we're going to play a video trailer for that book real quick. And when we get back, we're going to dive into the divine economic model theory. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back and dig into the meat of this topic.
To sharpen your vision of the economy beyond your wildest imagination. Introducing Divine Economy Model by Bruce Koerber, a book that escorts you through a very human way of building subjective models. These models are visual, logical, and conceptual. They acknowledge the complementary nature of human intellect and spirituality in all human action. Will you be able to grasp these economic models? Absolutely. You will feel as if you are building the models yourself. They fit into your imagination every step of the way, making logical sense while surprising you with new insights. To say that you've never experienced anything like this before is an understatement. Since when have you encountered a qualitative model of the economy that captures purposeful, spiritual, human action? You will suddenly recognize how intimately connected we are and how the economy empowers us as individuals and fulfills our social nature. The four models presented in this book, macroeconomics, microeconomics, ethical economics, and economic justice, are cohesively bound together. Divine Economy Model by Bruce Koerber. Get your copy now at Amazon.
Welcome back. We're going to now dive into that model. I'm going to share an image here, Bruce. You and I talked about this that I think is going to help everybody right at the start sort of visualize this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this image? I'm going to see if I can expand it maybe a little bit in size there while you explain it.
So again, this is the providential grace of God. I had an intuition to put a pencil and paper next to my bed. And then I woke up, I had a dream that startled me, woke me up enough. And I know myself well enough that I don't remember my dream. So anyways, I wrote down what I saw in the dream. And then in the morning, I looked at it and I knew it was a significant contribution to economics. And this is what I saw. And so it has the human spirit, transformation, law, and order, with the center is divine economy. And so I just used my technical training as an Austrian economist, which is using the methodology of subjectivism, to unfold the secrets and all the depth of knowledge that's within that image. So that's what I did. So my first book basically just looked at this as the macro model of the economy. And in my second book, I delved into the heart of this. What happens when, well, I mean, I'm not sure. Let's stop there and see if there's any comments you'd like to make or whatever.
Well, so I'm sensing that your economic model was definitely inspired by Austrian economics.
Yes.
However, you have a spiritual view of us humans, right, and our purpose. I know that in the Baha'i faith, there's the idea that work is worship. We were at a we go to a senior assisted living facility every Sunday, and we share just spiritual discussion with the people there. And there's this prayer. It's actually a Baha'i prayer that says, "Strive that your actions day by day might be beautiful prayers." Right. So our actions can actually be viewed as a form of prayer, and work is a form of worship. So human activity, being the basic input in Austrian economics, you've taken that and transcended it. Is that fair? Or am I don't mean to oversimplify it, but
No, I think what's happening again, Austrian economics comes from the tradition of classical liberalism, and classical liberalism was how economics developed, and it was inspired by monks, people who were trying to find spiritual solutions to things. Well, even though Austrian economics uses that same methodology, there really was an absence of this core understanding from classical liberalism of the harmony of science and religion. So that's why the divine economy theory is so important, because it brings that back. It brings it back to the core of classical liberalism, which is this harmony of science and religion. There's no incompatibility there. In fact, they enrich each other. And so that's what this model does. It acknowledges both the subjective nature of humans and the spiritual nature of humans.
So I'm reading now again a definition, because I'm a novice. I'm deeply interested in this, and I have been looking at it my whole life from an experiential perspective, personally exploring within systems how this works, including, as I mentioned earlier, my time at Deloitte Consulting, Deloitte being an auditing firm, and managing the profit and loss statements, and we were also involved in Sarbanes-Oxley and these other methods of integrating business into society in an enhanced way. So experientially, I've been involved in this, but from a scholarly perspective, sometimes these terms need to be stated in simple layman's language. So here I'm reading classical liberalism is a political tradition and a branch of liberalism that advocates free market and laissez-faire economics and civil liberties under the rule of law, with special emphasis on individual autonomy, limited government, economic freedom, political freedom, and freedom of speech.
Yes.
All principles I would agree with and heartily endorse personally. I would stipulate, however, that this whole idea of free market and laissez-faire, that needs to be unpacked a little bit, because for me, and this is something I've pondered, the idea of a market requires some version of, you might say, regulation, because it requires law and order, right? You had law and order in your image that you shared earlier. It says under the rule of law. So a free market is not, what's that modern term, right? There's a modern, what's the term I'm looking for? And certain people represent this.
Anarchy.
Well, anarchy is an extreme form, but there's a different there's a different term that's used today, right? And I'm thinking Ron Paul, right?
Ron
He's
Paul.
he's known for I'm having a brain freeze on the term here. Do you know what I'm referring to? It's not anarchy, but it's
Minarchism?
no. In any case, the rule of law and some regulation is required in order for a market to function.
Well, here's the thing. What a market really is, it's voluntary social cooperation. So
Libertarianism. Libertarianism is the word I was looking for.
Libertarianism. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Law is found. See, here's the thing. If you look at science, what science does is they discover laws, and in the physical world, in the natural sciences, those laws are like gravity. They're discovered, and then things can be understood based on that. And so, but the whole reality of it is they have to be discovered. They're not created. Nobody creates the law of gravity. They discover it. And the same thing in economics. There are laws, and the laws are discovered. They're not created. And that's the difference. We're living in a world where these laws are created, and instead of being discovered and then followed. If they were discovered and then followed, we wouldn't have the problems we're having.
Well, there's also, and I'm reflecting now on two guideposts of my spiritual journey and understanding, which are the first and second Psalm in the Bible. The first Psalm talks about blessed and happy is the man who follows God's laws, who meditates on his ways, and he shall be like a tree planted by the river, his quiver full of arrows, meaning he'll have many children and a happy family and a happy life. The second Psalm says, why do the heathen rage and imagine a vain thing? They say we shall cast his bands off. We shall cast his bands aside. We will cast off the constraints that the Almighty has placed on us. Right? And so you have these two contrasting lifestyles. One is happy submission to the natural order as established by the Creator. And the other one is the idea, you might say in Baha'i language, a vain imagination and an idle fancy, that we can set up a different kind of order, one that makes the law of God obsolete, one that casts those constraints, those bands asunder. Somewhere in there, you have this idea of libertarianism, right? Maximize autonomy and political freedom, but you still, it's under the law. It's under the law.
Yeah,
but what is the law, right? That's the question. So and you're saying the law is discovered.
Yeah, and it's given, and there is a lawgiver. So the discovery is directly connected to the lawgiver. I mean, because if you're going to discover law, you have to know who the lawgiver is, so you can find the law. Because that's where the law comes from. The law comes from the lawgiver, and everybody's capable of discovering that. And so here's the thing. Every time a manifestation of God comes, they're basically a divine ethicist, they're a divine economist, they're the lawgiver, and they potentially bring the kingdom of God on earth. The difference.
Well, so let's explore that for a moment.
Okay.
Because Moses is known as the lawgiver.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's known as the lawgiver.
Yeah.
But you've just said that the law is discovered. And I don't know if Moses
by humans.
Correct.
Yeah.
So Moses, when he came down from the mountain, he had received the stone tablets, right? Written by the finger of God, according to the testimony in the Bible.
Okay.
Which, by the way, for our Baha'i friends, Abdul Baha stated that it is the religious duty of every Baha'i to study the Old and New Testaments and to know them as the Word of God. right? So that's why I have no qualms about citing the Bible frequently and repeatedly, even though I'm a Baha'i. So Moses came down from the mountain with the tablets written in the finger of God. And when he did so, you might recall, the people were dancing around the golden calf, right? And in the Cecil B. DeMille's rendition of this, he threw the tablets at the calf, and the ground opened up and swallowed them or whatever. But the point is, the people then did not like the fact that Moses' face shone with a brilliance because of his near encounter with God. The story, the way it's rendered is God placed his hand to shield Moses from dying from actually seeing God. But his encounter was so close that his face was beaming light. And the people made him place a veil over his face. They literally said, you need to veil that. We can't stand that. It's scary, right? It's too much light, too much brilliance. So the veil was placed over Moses' face to help the people overcome their whatever fear, superstition, shame. But what's my point here? My point is that I would say Moses, came to reveal the law, to shine a light on the law, to help the people discover it, right? And certain things were laid out and mapped out and reinforced that law. So, I mean, that's just my perspective here, which is maybe sort of a middle ground for the whole audience that to assist with this, that may not have the same views that you and I do. But what's my whole point here? It's this idea of bringing one's actions into alignment with this natural law. And Paul the apostle said, those Gentiles, the nations, those who were not Hebrews, who therefore don't know or even understand what Moses brought at all. They've never read it. They've never been exposed to it. They certainly don't have the reverence towards the Torah that the Hebrew people did. But Paul the apostle said, if they keep the law without knowing the law, they have still fulfilled the law. I mean, and is that a fair statement about the divine economy model, that if we are in alignment with it, and I would assume this applies to Austrian economics as well, you don't have to be an economist or study it to participate in it, right, and to be successful in it.
Right. That's true.
So sorry for the sort of long digression, but I didn't want to get hung up on terms like manifestation and things like that the audience is just not familiar with.
Like I said, the market is really voluntary social cooperation, and what comes from that is not just economic; it's ethical. Because you're doing voluntary social cooperation, you're developing ethically, also. So that's how why the free market or the market itself influences civilization.
Let me unpack that a little bit too with a couple of questions. So, in a market functions on the exchange of information and trust in that information, correct? So again, a Baha'i principle, truthfulness is the foundation of all virtue.
Right.
So for a market to function, truthfulness is essential, because over time, people will come to mistrust the information upon which they are basing their decisions, and basically realize that the system is rigged against them and somebody else is taking advantage of them. And the idea of laissez-faire economics is that ultimately markets will fail, unless you have that basic structure.
So I think the real concept of laissez-faire is the idea of hands-off, and the reason it's hands-off is because God's creation. That's part of God's creation. He's given it to humanity. This economy. I mean, and it's His providence. So it doesn't need to be messed with, because if people trust God and are trustworthy, then everyone prospers.
So bad actors.
Bad actors, yeah.
Right. Let's talk about bad actors for a moment. I'm going to go back here real quick and share this again. So, and we'll get more into your specific theories and allow you later here or in future episodes in which, because our plan is to have you back multiple times and unpack this, right? Hang on one second. Here we go. So we've got the law and order on either side of this, and transformation in human spirit. But so again, law and order, because this is where the rub is, and this is where there's a lot of debate and disputes around economics and regulation and so on. That law and order is in place in your model. So there is some kind of non-laissez-faire, right? In other words, somebody is enforcing that law and order at some level in order for all this to work. So help unpack that for us a little bit.
Like I said, law is something that is discovered, and so if it doesn't need. I mean, it doesn't imply that it's also, everything is done through voluntary social cooperation. So there's nothing implied about law that it's coercive in any regard, because first of all, it's discovered, and when it's discovered, you discover it's not coercive, and because it's done through voluntary social cooperation. No one's doing something that's coercive. They're abiding by the law that they're discovering. So I don't know. Law, again, it's an example of the law that I use. That the first element of this model on the law is property rights, because just like God is sovereign, we're sovereign. Just like God has dominion, we have dominion. So the property rights is the foundation of this law, and it basically that's where it starts at the level of the individual. Is the dominion and the sovereignty of property rights for an individual. So that's where that part of that model is. And order, what the element of this model that describes order is market. It's the like you said, the exchange of goods and information. It's voluntary social cooperation. So it is orderly, but it's not coercive. It's not, and here's the thing: if we were talking about exchange and we were talking about a person being untrustworthy, what happens in this exchange process? If they're untrustworthy, it becomes known that they're untrustworthy, so no one will exchange with them in the future. I mean, there might be an instance where it happens, but if they don't act in a godly way, eventually they hurt themselves, because no one will voluntarily exchange with them anymore. So that's the order. The market is the order. Property rights is the law.
So there's so I think I do understand what you're saying, and I also very much agree with it, by the way. I've talked a number of times on this show about how religion, for example, which in one sense could be described as an idea. It's more than that, but it must inspire and not coerce, right? And as a former minister who walked away from it, again, to separate my faith from my paycheck because I was feeling coerced. And I also wasn't comfortable with the way in which even the very idea of an ordination was in itself coercive. In my role as a minister, I sought to minister to serve. Um, there's a definition in the New Testament about ministers are helpers of your joy, helpers of your joy. And there's also the statement that um, the role of the ministry is in meekness, instructing those who oppose themselves, right? Which was another definition that I could live with. In meekness, instructing those who oppose themselves. Um, but in the end, the very idea was of some divine authority, and you couldn't sort of disabuse the parishioners, if you will. We didn't call them that, but you couldn't disabuse them of that idea, and so they looked at you in the same way that they wanted Moses to cover his face. In this sense, they wanted you to tell them what the truth was, or in some cases, what to do, what decisions to make, because they ascribed an unwarranted authority to anyone who had that role. And in the end, I found I couldn't serve people because of that situation, because my goal was to always point them to God, and well, you need to read your Bible and you need to pray about that. But that wasn't how the role was expected to be fulfilled and perceived, right? There was some degree of coercion in it, which is my point. So as you map out the divine economy, the devil is in the detail. The rub is where the rubber meets the road, right? So for example, Cain and Abel, the first two human beings. Now, it wasn't a marketplace, it wasn't a transaction, but you might say they were both trying to curry favor with God because they were giving an offering to him. And whether they were or not, that's an internal matter of what their attitude was. But God looked favorably upon Abel, and he looked less favorably upon Cain because of the nature of the offering that was brought. And this caused jealousy, and Cain ultimately slew Abel. So now you have murder, right? In the first, example. So murder can happen for many reasons. It's often happened because of greed. We watch movies and shows all the time that center on that idea of some heist, some theft, and murder is happening, and carnage is ensuing, right? So how do you deal with that in the divine economy model, where when it's about economy, when it's about advancement, trade, commerce, exchange, whatever you want to call it, that you have people who in various ways try to game the system, in some ways very violently. So how does that work?
Well, it's the whole picture. There's human purposeful action. There's transformation that's taking place. There are laws, discovered law. There is order, and none of that is disconnected from the harmony of science and religion. So each of us is responsible for using our gift of the entrepreneurial spirit that is inside of us, that causes us to be alert or to not be alert. I mean, if we choose not to be alert, we're just going to go through life and not really raise ourselves up to our potential. But if we're alert, we're searching, we're seekers after truth. And when we're seekers after truth, we're going to discover laws. We're going to operate voluntarily, exchanging with others through voluntary cooperation. We're going to act and to be transformed by the acts. So if there's individuals who are so here's the point that I'd like to make is that because we don't understand the spiritual nature of the economy and its spiritual powers to help us become better human beings and to be more spiritual, it's operating right now outside of that, And so there are things going on that are not good, but the only way to fix that is to give them the truth, and the truth is that the economy is divine, and that there are and all the things that are necessary for the economy to bring prosperity and peace are at our fingertips, and it's through knowledge that we can get there. And we can't say that, because you can't really put the divine economy is in itself is a pure thing. So the impurities that are out there are outside of that. And well, how do these outside things that are impure get fixed? They don't get fixed by they get fixed by the transformation that takes place as far as understanding. We are kind of barbaric in our understanding.
Well, yeah. Let's pause on that and just look at the etymology of understanding.
Okay.
To stand under, right? To subordinate, to submit your own ideas to a higher reality or a greater reality, right? And yeah, I would agree with you completely, and I appreciate the way you're trying to express this. And what I'm gathering is that this idea of a divine economy, it permeates everything, right? Everything that we have and everything that we experience is just a gigantic gift from God.
Mm-hmm.
We participate in it, and we're swimming in that ocean of love, of law, of opportunity, of experience, of interacting and engaging with reality. And we're learning and growing as we go. And when we use a dichotomy of separating out the spiritual and the material, which is, it's kind of impossible for us at this plane of existence. I would submit it's not even intended. God did not intend us to separate the spiritual and the material. He blended it together in such a way that it is inseparable.
True.
One way of looking at that is, I don't like the term profess. People like to profess things. Like, you can profess all you want, but in the end, what you do is what matters, not your professions of believing in this, that, or the other thing. Let deeds, not words, be your adorning, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea that somehow the economy itself is evil, right? Or that participation in material pursuits is evil. Again, the Baha'i faith sums this up nicely in the phrase "work is worship." Yeah, I'm loving this discussion. It is indeed, as your video said, it's providing new insights and ahas into this topic. Looks like we're going to go a bit over time, maybe a lot over time, but I got to get, speaking of economy, I got to get to another commercial break here. There's an author who is listening in and has made some comments, and he's got a new book coming out, and we want to highlight that. When we come back, we'll have a few more comments from you, and then we'll dive right into some of the comments from the audience. Okay. And much of the material that you had wanted to present today, we were struggling with at a technical level anyway, and we'll pick that up next time. But don't go anywhere. Right after this quick commercial break, we're going to be right back with more of Bruce Koerber and the Divine Economy.
Overwhelmed by the confusion and chaos of today's world. Politics, the media, and even the environment have become increasingly challenging landscapes to navigate. We're living in a narrative that began 4 decades ago, and now we're reaching its climax. What the hell is going on is here to provide clarity and perspective. Don't get triggered by another tweet or misled by clickbait ads. Gain a deeper understanding and grasp the broader picture. Understanding is powerful. When we comprehend the news in context, we can see through the sensationalism and misinformation. Get insight and clarity by discovering what the hell is going on post-COVID. Cowan's insightful and well-researched work will help you navigate the complexities of today's world. Order your copy today.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson. We're here with Bruce Koerber, the originator of the divine economy model in terms of its publication and the idea, not the originator of the model. That's a much higher source. But he's the writer of a number of books, and we're here diving deep into the topic of exactly what is this model. We'll show the little image there again, Bruce, and invite you to provide some wrap-up comments for tonight's episode on what we've been discussing before we then dive into some of the comments from the audience.
So that's the first image. I developed that into the macro model, and then I found out that I could go deep into it. I made a micro model, and then I noticed that there were two other strands. There was the human spirit transformation, that was the ethical strand, and then I noticed the orders strand, and that's the economic justice strand. So I wrote those 4 books, and all 4 of those constitute the divine economy theory.
We'll start right here with this comment from God Thought of It First. Seems like an appropriate moniker for this topic, right? I'm more curious as to what areas the divine economy model require further exploration or refinement. And I think we've just scratched the surface, Bruce. You've written a number of books, and this is just like the basic introductory sort of reading of the cover or the back of one of those books. And there's so much more underneath of it. But what would you have to say to God Thought of It First here?
Well, I think for me personally, I'm going to, at some point down the road, follow in the footsteps of Ludwig von Mises and look at money and credit.
Well. So that allows me to introduce one of my favorite topics. And you and I talked about this a little bit, Bruce, and going back again to the lawgiver Moses. Most people don't realize that Moses brought a very sophisticated economic model in which you had the 7th-day Sabbath, which was the sign of the Mosaic covenant, in my opinion. God said that it's the sign between me and you. Because of keeping the Sabbath, you have identified me as the creator, not just of this hill or that mountain or that lake or that valley, which was a common conception of gods in those days, but the creator of time and space and the maker of holy time, the setter of divine clock and divine appointments. But then he tied that in with a 7-year land Sabbath, and every 7 years the land was supposed to lie fallow. That land which you talked about as in this sense a divine right, because God said he gave it to them in perpetuity. And every 7 years the land got a rest, but so did the economy, because all debt was forgiven every 7 years. And every 7 times 7, the year of Jubilee, in the 50th year, not only was debt forgiven, but all the land reverted to its rightful owners. So you could have monetary debt for a period of 7 years, and you could lose your land for a period of 49 years. So if your grandfather really messed up, that land would still revert back to the grandchildren after 49 years. So there would be no massive ongoing aggregation of wealth. The extremes of wealth and poverty would be eliminated based on that simple mechanism, which was the grounding of the system of credit and debt. You follow me? So that might be something for further exploration in the future and further discussion. And I'm surprised at how few people know about this. Anyway, so going back to some of the earlier comments, there was somebody who was asking how old you were when you were traveling like that. You did a lot of travels, Bruce. So how young did you start traveling, and how much of your life was spent traveling to gain some of the perspectives that you have perhaps from global exposure?
I started, I guess, when I was 18, and about when I was 30, I guess, is when I settled down.
Okay, we had Kevin R. apparently read one of your books, at least. Chapter 3 was his favorite, and it bridged the gap between theoretical economics and practical ethical considerations.
Wow. Good. Thank you.
So any comments on that?
Well, I'm not sure which book and which chapter, but usually
I think it's the one that was in the video, because that's when this comment came in.
Oh, okay. So that chapter is about ethical economics, yeah, and so that's very good because it does it introduces the idea that okay, so there is we showed that one model that showed the transformation, the divine economy, and I mean the human spirit, and then the divine economy and the transformation. That series of three. Well, the ethical economics model then puts juxtapositions another thing beside it, with the divine economy in the middle again, but on the top is divine revelation, and then the bottom divine civilization. So you got this across the divine economies in the same position, but instead of like the individuals going through this transformation, and it's going both directions. You transform and then you act, and you transform and you act, that kind of thing there. Whereas the other side of that model is unidirectional. It goes from divine revelation to divine economy to divine civilization. And that's what a manifestation, a prophet of God, when they come, they bring the revelation, which has potential, which is they are a divine economist in addition to a prophet, and the ultimate goal, ultimate end result of their appearance, if it's abided by properly, is divine civilization.
Yeah, is that not the very idea behind a covenant, right?
Yes.
So they're bringing a new idea, new information, and they're forming a covenant, a binding covenant, and there is a transactional element to a lot of it. It's like, if you do these things, then you will have this result, which is that same principle of reward and punishment.
True. Yeah.
Here's a follow-on question. How do you define the divine laws that underpin your model, and how can they be universally applied in diverse cultural and religious contexts?
Well, again, every person. So I honor and respect human subjectivity and also their spirituality. So no matter what individual it is, they're subjective and they're spiritual. So they're following their pathway. Okay. And so in that process, what's happening is they're discovering, if they're exercising their entrepreneurial spirit, the spirit of searching after truth, they're discovering laws, and then they're applying them. And so that's why it's universal, because no matter which individual, they're subjectively approaching it, and they're spiritually approaching it, and then they exercise it. But the thing is, the nice thing again about this market concept of voluntary social cooperation, because they're not doing it in isolation, they're doing it amongst others. So there's this give and take, and there's this learning that's taking place. And so all of that happening all around the world, people, and now we're in an age where that's universally possible. You could be engaged with someone no matter where they are. So all that process is bringing people along in a common direction, and learning together, and enriching each other. So that's why it happens that way.
Well, one way of looking at this, or asking the question, might be to introduce the idea of cultural relativism, right? So I've lived in 7 different countries, and speak 5 languages, one of them very badly, nonetheless. But that's the exposure to a lot of different ideas and perspectives. And it was actually an experience in Leningrad during the collapse of the Soviet Union when Gorbachev had been abducted and tanks were on their way from Moscow to Leningrad while I was coming in from Finland and working with people at the Radio TV Leningrad at a critical moment in the 90s when I realized, wow, everybody around the world, no matter how they were raised, no matter what religion, no matter what ideology, they all have one thing in common. We human beings all have one thing in common, and it is that we all think we're right. And no matter how foolish your idea seems to me, how backward, how wrong, how evil, you've probably adopted it because you think it's good. And you might think my idea is evil, right? We all believe we're right. And cultural relativism, if you imagine that these different nations, these different cultures are cultures in the sense of a petri dish, right? That kind of bacteriological culture, biological culture. We all know that some cultures thrive and some don't. Some cultures develop healthy situations and some are toxic. So cultural relativism, I'm sorry, in the global marketplace of ideas and experience, some cultures over time prove superior to others in a variety of ways, but that's not in a monolithic, monocrop, monoculture kind of way. There's usually some value, even in an unhealthy culture. There's some piece of understanding or of rightness that is maybe even being taken to an extreme. Each pillar of strength casts a shadow is another way of looking at that. But nonetheless, in this global marketplace over time, that's what you're saying with this exchange of ideas in the marketplace in the divine economy. These divine laws get explored and understood in different ways in different cultures, and we all learn together ultimately from that experience.
Yeah, one thing I want to point I want to make is some people think in these terms. They think that if someone makes a bad decision, they're not acting rationally, and that's incorrect. Everyone's acting rationally based on the knowledge that they have. They're subjective, you know. They don't know. They're making a rational decision, even from if it looks irrational to another person. But same, like you were saying, if the table's turned, they're probably thinking you're making irrational decisions. So, but the reality is, unless a person's under the influence of drugs or there's something seriously mentally wrong with them, every human being is making rational decisions. It's just subjective, is all. So, and that doesn't mean that if a person who puts their hand in the fire is because they're whatever reason they're doing it, it's still rational. But they at the same time they you could also say that they haven't learned, yet.
Well, I saw this little show recently. It was a magician prank show, and for whatever reason, I won't expand on this. But the magician was meeting with somebody who didn't know, and he was trying to convince her that after he disappeared, she would believe he was a ghost. And one of the things he had was he had this little fan up his sleeve, and he literally put his hand over a candle and held it there. There goes my camera again. So. The point is that see, I'm turning into a ghost now. Right there. So the point is, he held his hand over the fire, and it was very rational to him. And this woman was aghast because this fire was hot, this candle, but his hand wasn't heating up because the air was blowing the heat away. For what it's worth, and there are all kinds of different ways and different reasons why people do things. I'm going to quickly see if I can get my camera to come back into focus here.
Thanks for the question, Hulkster.
Yep, and then I'd like to then show a couple more comments real quick. UP Monster, I'm actually curious how policymakers can incorporate the divine economy model into national economic policies without compromising on secular governance principles.
Well, here's the crux of the issue, is that people think they know what economics is, but really what they know is statism. Okay.
Thank you.
They're not the
Well
same
said.
thing. And so any divisions or trying to manipulate things, that's an appearance of the concept of the ideology of statism.
Well, and here's kind of the flip side on that, right?
Huh?
Here's kind of the flip side of that from Cameron. These sorts of things work better with cultural hegemony and a common religion. And I'm assuming you might disagree with that, depending on what he means by these sorts of things, right? In other words, you're saying, no, it doesn't work when you have that. Ultimately, it doesn't work. It might seem to work for a while in a limited context, or maybe it seems like a very big context over the course of several generations. It might seem to work, but ultimately it's going to collapse.
Right. I think it's again short of it, the vision that a person has. If they're thinking in terms of right now and in this little situation. So here there's a famous Austrian economist named Henry Hazlitt, and he said a bad economist is someone who sees only the short run and only the immediate consequences. A good economist sees the long run and all the consequences. So if you have cultural hegemony and a common religion, at least hegemony being part of that common religion, then it may in the short run look good, and in that small domain look good, but that is a narrow vision, and it's bad economics as a result.
We're not going to have time to get through all the comments. There are tons of them, but this is an interesting one. I'd like your comment on this. Doesn't laissez-faire principle lead to enormous prices?
Again, laissez-faire is sort of like the word capitalism. It's misunderstood. Laissez-faire, what it truly means is that God, okay, here's the best way I can describe that. Okay, in economics, the idea of economic equilibrium, if something's out of balance, it comes back into balance. You know, that's what this equilibrium is. And what is the force behind that? The force behind that is God, okay, the all-powerful. And so laissez-faire is allowing the economic equilibrium to work. So that would not in any way lead to enormous prices if economic equilibrium is at work.
Looking for one last comment here. Crackers, welcome back, Crackers. Haven't heard from you in a while. I always remember that name because with the Something or Other Publishing Soup, Crackers made the joke Soup and Crackers once. So one of our shows. Anyway, I don't think the economy is evil. I think that men just have a way to make everything evil.
Okay, here's my response to that. It's true, because again, if you think in terms of something pure, and then you think in something that would make it impure, it's a corruption. Okay, and so basically, what we don't realize is that the economy is divine, it is pure, and humans interfering in it is a corruption of it, and it's going to have negative consequences. We don't trust God. That's basically the point.
And that's a great point to end on tonight. And that's really the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more to explore here, and explore we will in future episodes. We're planning to have Bruce back on multiple times to further unpack his divine economic theory. We do have one more item left to do tonight, and that is to introduce the guest that will be here next week. I think, Bruce, we have you planned for the first Tuesday of every month over the next few months. We'll need to probably confer and make certain, but we'll probably have you back on 4 or 5 times to dig into this deeper. We also have some other interesting economist or economist-minded people as we deepen on this topic of the intersection of the material and the spiritual, and how we should view this life, this journey that we're on. So thank you so much for teeing this topic up so wonderfully today. But next week, we're going to have a different guest, and I'd like to show you a quick video trailer of her. Her name is Marnie Swedberg, and Marnie is, let me just pull up the little blurb here. She and I have had a number of wonderful conversations leading up to her appearance on the show. But Marnie is an international leadership and mentor, author, and media personality. She offers unique insights into personal growth and mentorship through her extraordinary experiences overcoming challenges and leading with faith and resilience. She has inspired audiences globally, from major corporations to Christian retreats, and a top-rated blog talk show in her own right. Marnie established a network of Christian women speakers that has 1,400 participants and circles the globe. You are not going to want to miss next week's episode number 111 with Marnie Swedberg, the role of mentorship in personal transformation. Let's have a quick clip here of Marnie.
God down, maybe letting yourself down, not measuring up. Hi, my name is Marnie Swedberg. I wrote the book Flow Through Vessel, How to Master the Habit of Letting God Flow Through You. In God's economy, we simply cannot give something we don't have. If I don't have peace, I can't give it to you. If I don't have money, I can't give it to you. But what God wants to do is he wants to flow good stuff to us. We get to enjoy it, and then through us. Our lives are like a cup. If you think about it, we say things like, they sucked me dry. I'm all out of gas. I got nothing left to give. But what we're supposed to do is, instead of trying to come up with what's in the glass, we're supposed to stay submerged into Jesus, let Jesus fill our lives, and then when others suck on our lives, that's who they get. Grab the Flow Through book bundle. Right now it's for free over at marnie.com. You get the ebook in a download version, worksheets plus a song. I'll see you over there.
Quick sneak peek in what you can expect next week. A little bit of a personal application of some of the principles that Bruce has been expounding here with the divine economy theory. So, Bruce, any last words for our audience tonight before we wrap up?
Well, just that eventually it found a home in Africa, in Uganda, and there's a lot of stuff going on with a think tank there that's spreading the divine economy model to young leaders and entrepreneurs. And so that's where it's the most vibrant right now in the world.
Well, and I think I can quickly share a picture. Why don't you tell us about this picture here to wrap up tonight's episode?
So the man there on the bottom in the blue shirt, he's part of the Nintendo network, and they've adopted this book as a cornerstone for their outreach. And this one is an example of outreach to, fairly young students, but they're reaching out to adults and village leaders too.
Wonderful. I'm getting some ideas now about talking to you about our program of experiential leadership through the Royal Falcon Foundation. And we have a spring, summer, fall, winter camp program where we're planting, we're harvesting, we're integrating that harvest into the meals that are served during the program. And everybody's hands-on experiential learning about the vast abundance that comes from being in tune with nature and natural law, companion gardening, regenerative farming, all those principles that could transform our world if they were applied. Mm-hmm. So, wow, once again, thank you, Bruce, for joining this journey and joining this experience and joining this discussion. Can't wait to have you back a month from now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And to all of our audience, we're sorry if we didn't get to your particular chat comment. As always, send a comment to info@soupllc.com to win a free book, copy of Bruce's book. We didn't pick anyone tonight. There were just too many good comments and too much good discussion to get into it. But just send us an email, info@soupllc.com, and we'll share something out with you. So everyone have just a wonderful week until we see you back here next time. Same time, same place, 8 p.m. Central for Created in the Image of God.